I got out my special NASA hat just to add to the effect of saying this, and that along with the engine crane behind me, Houston, we really do have a problem. Okay, so those clips you guys just watched was me starting the process of replacing the harmonic balancer or crank pulley on my C5 Corvette. For those that don't know and haven't watched my previous video, the harmonic balancer is a common failure point on these cars. The inner hub separates from the outer hub because it's a bad bushing design, and if left unaddressed, it can cause some pretty bad damage to either your power steering rack or the timing chain cover on the engine. So this is something that had to be done before I really started driving this car. It's a pretty involved job. It requires a decent amount of labor because you got to pull the power steering rack out. But I was willing to take on the job myself because I, have these quick jacks now, and the whole point of me buying this car in its current form is to really challenge myself, learn, and just wrench on this car to have fun throughout the process. And I discovered something that's going to make this job a little bit more interesting, which is why I now have my engine crane out and assembled. So as I kind of already hinted at, one of the main things that you have to do when replacing the harmonic balancer pulley on this car is to remove the power steering rack, which is just right up there. Basically, to get access to the main bolt that holds the crank pulley onto the engine, you need to get the power steering rack out of the way so you can get a wrench on it to not only remove the pulley but also install the new one. One of the many things that you need to do to remove the power steering rack, in addition to removing the steering tie rods and a bunch of other things, a bunch of electrical connectors, one of the main things you need to do is disconnect the power steering lines that come from the power steering pump and feed the rack, and that is right over here. So it's kind of hard to see on camera, but right in here, this little piece right there where the flashlight's pointing at the tip there, that is the main input point for not only the steering shaft but also the power steering lines coming from the pump and going to the rack. So when I undid those lines, obviously a little bit of power steering fluid was going to kind of dribble out and come down, which I totally expected. Now it is a pretty tight fit to get a wrench in there to get those power steering lines off, and I was using a crow's foot wrench to get a good grip on the heads of those connection points, and in the process of doing that, my wrench actually came off and tink 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 fell but didn't hit the ground and actually landed on top of the composite leaf spring right under the engine there. So I grabbed my dolly there and rolled underneath the car to look for it, and in the process of doing so, I noticed a wet spot from the power steering fluid that was starting to dribble out from when I disconnected the lines. Now I guess I should be a little more specific. The area where I noticed a wet spot from the power steering fluid was in an area where there really shouldn't be power steering fluid. It wasn't like it was dribbling down an edge and then coming down that way. It was basically right in the middle of the subframe where there should be no area or way for fluid to dribble down that way. So it kind of raised an eyebrow, raised a few eyebrows, and I looked a little bit closer and I found a pretty big problem that I'm going to have to address here. So I'm going to go ahead and roll under the car here to show you guys what I found and where it is in relation to the rest of the car, but the most clear thing that's going to show what I found is through some pictures, which I'll splice in at the appropriate moment. So basically got on my little dolly here to roll under the car, or creeper, whatever you want to call it, to look for my wrench head. And so, I thought it landed about at the leaf spring area, so just rolling down under here, and let's see, it's pretty tight, so I'm going to do my best to show you guys So this is where the subframe begins. This is the front driver mounting point area, and then we got our lower driver's side control arm here. And one of the things that I noticed, what I've known for a while, is this scrape point on the bottom of the subframe here, right by this mounting point. And I knew about that since the first day I got the car. My thought was, when the car was at the auction yard, they pick these things up and move them around with these giant forklifts. So the fork just came in and was a little high and scraped that. So I didn't think anything of it. No big deal. Didn't see any cracks right away. But as I said earlier, I noticed a wet spot, and you can't really see it now because I've since reconnected the lines and dried it up, but the wet spot was coming down right here. So I was like, why is there power steering fluid or fluid coming down in this point? There really shouldn't be anything there. Well, then I took a closer look, and again, I apologize trying to get the camera in here. It's pretty tight, but basically up in that crevice there above the bushing and mounting point for this control arm, I noticed a pretty decent sized crack. You can kind of see it right there. So that was a pretty big bummer to find. The fluid was definitely coming down through there, so it's definitely a significant crack if it goes all the way up to the top, and basically comes across this way and then comes down this joint here. So it's definitely not something that I could leave unaddressed. If that goes on for long enough, the crack's going to grow, and worst cases is that this thing breaks off, I lose this lower control arm, and bad things can happen, especially if I'm driving in a spirited manner. So my guess is based on this scrape location here, it's not like a big chunk came off or anything, but it's a decent size, it's a decent looking scrape. So I refocused the camera to show you guys a little better of this scrape area. So I didn't think anything of this at first, but now I'm pretty sure that whatever caused this scrape also caused that crack up there. So I was pretty bummed to see that. This was either caused at the auction yard, which you can't predict everything when you get these cars from these auction yards, or it was a part of the accident. Either the car drove up over something or hit something. It doesn't really matter. It caused the damage, and now I have to address it. Now, I'm not gonna lie, I was pretty bummed when I saw that crack. I had a little bit of a freak out moment where I was thinking, like, what am I doing? Like, I just need to get a sensible car and quit throwing money into this thing. But then I took a minute, stepped back, took a 10-minute break, and I thought, no. This is why I bought this car. I bought this car to challenge myself to dive deeper into a car than I ever have before, and that is exactly what I'm going to do in order to get all this fixed, not only the balancer now, but also the subframe. So I've got a plan of attack of how I'm going to fix this. I even had the thought for a split second to just use JB Weld, and then I thought, nope, that's definitely a sketchy way on how to fix this. I want to do it the right way. I want this car to be safe, and I want it to be 100% mechanically sorted. Now, this car only has 56,000 miles on it, so it's a pretty low mile car given that it's a 20-year-old car. So I want it to be really mechanically sorted. I want it to drive really well and obviously be really safe, and throughout the process I'm going to make it better by adding some new parts over stock. So like I said, I think this thing probably happened either at the auction yard, the forklift came in a little too high and just really nailed and scraped that subframe, or in the accident the car ran over something and just scraped it. And the subframe is just a cast aluminum part, so it's relatively fragile, so it was just enough of a jarring impact to send that crack there, and that's something that's, at least from my knowledge, I'm sure you could probably repair it, but as I'll show you guys in a second, the replacement part I got on eBay was $200, and this thing is in great condition, so it was just worth it to just buy a whole new part. This is just one of those risks that you take when buying a car from a salvage auction. It makes for a great project, but it's a risk that you take on, especially buying one sight unseen all the way from Montana. There's just only so much you can do for inspecting things, and this just came to bite me in the butt a little bit. But after replacing the subframe, I've already repaired the front impact bar and everything on this car. I'll pretty much have dove as deep as you can into the front end of this car, so I'm hoping, knock on wood, that this is the last little bit of damage to uncover. So after this, the car in the front end here is going to be pretty well sorted, minus the repairs I got to do obviously on the front bumper. But that was this is a video that I've been meaning to talk about or to do do is to kind of just talk about the risks about buying a car from a salvage auction, because you know, people play it out on YouTube. It's like, oh, it's this great thing to save a lot of money on. Well, it can, but it also can't for many different reasons, which I'll make a whole video on. But anyways, before I keep talking on too much, I'm gonna go ahead and kind of just show you the part that I got, and just kind of briefly talk about the process, because it kind of worked out that this happened, because to remove the subframe, you're removing a lot of the parts, i.e. the steering rack that I had to remove anyways to replace the harmonic balancer. So in some ways, we're kind of killing two birds with one stone by having to do all this. Okay, so here's the part that's going to be the key to getting this car sorted again, and this is the replacement subframe that I got off eBay. I paid 150 bucks for it plus $50 shipping, so 200 bucks. It's a really clean example. As soon as I got it in the mail, I thoroughly inspected this thing with a flashlight and basically a fine-tooth comb to look for any damaged areas and any damaged areas that were then repaired to kind of make it harder to see, or you know, I didn't want a previously damaged and then fixed subframe. I want one that's just well sorted altogether. So this thing's sitting upside down right now, so I thoroughly inspected, especially the bottom side. So if the car that this part came off of hit something, just like what happened to my car, I wanted to make sure there was nothing with that. But it looks like a really clean part. They definitely cleaned it before selling it, so it made it easier to inspect as well. And all the mounting locations for the suspension arms and the threaded holes for the sway bar and just all the different components look really clean. It doesn't appear that anything is cross-threaded or damaged in that area as well. So in order to replace this part, you basically have to support the engine from the top of the car, which is why I now have my engine hoist assembled. This was sitting in my side yard, so I was saving this thing for a rainy day, and thankfully it paid off to save this giant hunk of metal. And I'm going to be using this to support the engine from the top while basically drop the subframe and all of the components out from the bottom. And in doing that, you obviously have to loosen and undo the motor mount. So that's one of the things that mounts the subframe here, is the motor mounts, hence why you have to support the engine from the top when you remove this thing. So this car only has 56,000 miles on it, but it is 20 years old, so the rubber motor mounts have probably seen better days. So I'm going to use this as the opportunity to improve upon these, and I got some nice new solid motor mounts, polyurethane motor mounts from Hinson Motorsports, so I'm going to be installing those while I'm replacing the subframe and also the harmonic balancer. Like I said, the power steering rack is just going to drop with the subframe, so that's going to get everything out of the way that I had to get out of the way to actually do the balancer. So that's kind of the area of this job where I'll be killing two birds with one stone in some way. So I'm not actually doing any wrenching today. I just kind of wanted to use this as an update video to fill you guys in on all the craziness that's going on. I started, like I showed you guys earlier, filming the video for replacing the harmonic balancer. I hope to have that done in a weekend, and then I found the crack, and it obviously made this job a little bit more interesting. So now I have to find the time to kind of commit a weekend here to actually removing all this. It's going to be a pretty involved job. It's not going to be easy, but I think I've got all the tools and resources for help that I need to get this done in my garage here. So I'm trying to figure out over the next few weeks here when the best time to do this job is. Obviously we have Christmas coming up, and I've got a lot of family personal things coming up, so I'm going to have to figure out the best weekend to do it. But I at least want to provide you guys an update so you kind of know what's going on in the garage here. I know I've been doing a lot of 3D printing podcast videos, which I'll still be doing, and then I've got some other just 3D printing specific videos that I'll be doing as well. But hopefully once I get this subframe and all this major repairs done with this, that'll allow me to kind of get into the fun parts of this build, which is where I really incorporate 3D printing and possibly some carbon fiber filaments and polymers into some of the parts that I have envisioned for this car. So I'm really excited for that part, and I just kind of have to drudge through the not so fun repair parts. But like I said, this is going to really help me to learn a lot about this car. I'm really diving deep into the front end of this car, so I'm kind of excited to really push myself more than I ever have before. So I know I'm slowly building an audience of C5 Corvette or just Corvette viewers in general, so if you guys have any experience with doing this type of work, I know people that have to replace the upper oil pan gasket have to lower the subframe and do a lot of the similar things that I'm having to do, not removing the subframe entirely. But if you have any tips based on prior experience or know someone that has prior experience, if you could leave me a comment, I'd greatly appreciate it. I think I'm pretty well researched through forums and just different people that I know on what needs to be done. I've been actively making a list on all of the pieces that have to get disconnected or unplugged in order to remove the subframe, and then all of the pieces that I have to take off and then put on the new subframe. So, long story short, I've got a few interesting projects coming up with the car. The car's been sitting on the quick jack, so I'm also using it as the opportunity to clean some things up with the car and just get it that much closer to being a really fun, well-sorted driving car. So thank you all so much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. As always, if you have any comments or questions, please feel free to leave them in the comment section below, and I'll be happy to answer or respond to them. Make sure you guys subscribe for a lot of juicy Corvette content to come and 3D printing content as well. And other than that, I will see you guys in the next one.